Hey guys, welcome to another session of RBTL, or Reading Between the Lines. This is my thoughts on the balance adjustment preview for the August 3rd edition. This is right after the E7WC qualifiers? Or preliminaries or whatever is just over. You know, when I was reading this originally, I was asking my guildmates, I'm like, this patch kind of sucks. And they're like, well, imagine making like OP heroes right before the E7WC, and I'm like, okay, yeah, bingo. So going forward, I think, like, you know, there's no surprises in terms of if you read this and you're just like, wait, isn't that kind of underwhelming? Yes, it is, and I think that what my guildmate said was like that was probably legitimate reason. If you guys remember, like the first E7WC, Carrot was like buffed. I think it's like during the E7WC, and that was like a total meta shifter, and it changed a lot. Either way, going forward, we have a Uelle of Light. So Uelle, Lionheart Sermia, Haste, Tanibria or Tanibria, Mort, Silk, and Soothan. Artifact, Rise of Monarch, Dux Noctus, and Steadfast Gatekeeper. And then we have the debuff that gets buffed, Restrict. That I think is the biggest topic for me here, but let's go through the heroes. First things first is Uelle of Light. I think this is a very underwhelming buff. Where she stands right now, where she's used right now. Yes, basically on paper she is getting a buff, but I don't think it's going to change. It's not a buff that will increase her usage. The 25% combat readiness to herself is to me kind of weird. Like, she's not a super fast healer to begin with, and I almost feel like this being a 50% wouldn't have even been too broken in terms of like her viability overall. But yes, overall it's a buff, so I'm not gonna say that it's not. And then of course increasing the health is whatever, it's good. So there you go. Lionheart Sermia, my thoughts on this. So I think this buff itself isn't gonna make Lionheart Sermia again more used than she was. Although I do think that the increase of combat readiness is very nice, because a lot of the times, like what I see is like Lionheart procs the it's far from over, gets the defense buff, resistance buff, and let's say there's a hand guy or something, like strips it, or someone like disables her before she gets a turn. So in the sense that like this skill gains you a combat readiness is a pretty big deal, because she might steal the turn. All right, so but I don't think that this increase of 20% combat readiness will make her from like, you know, fourth, fifth pick usable to all of a sudden like a third pick. I don't think that's the case, but it will definitely make her choice in certain scenarios more secured. The damage though increased is obviously a great buff as well, but the thing is, like, when Lionheart is picked properly and built properly, it's not like she lacked damage. So the damage dealt increases is great, because maybe you could offset that damage for other sets or other stats, you know, depending on your playstyle. Like even with the combat readiness and damage dealt increase, like maybe there's a case where like Cleave Lionheart Sermia might be playable, maybe. I don't know, like a booster into Apolotus with Lionheart Sermia being on speed set or something. Like, I think there's a possibility, I think, but again, I don't believe that this was even their intent. So yeah, I think that they're just thinking that it's gonna improve her overall usability, but I think with CR boost and damage dealt increased, that the first things first, like a player should be thinking about, okay, does that change her viability in terms of a different set altogether? So I think maybe, right? Damage dealt is increased, and you get combat readiness. Maybe speed play, like speed set or high speed, is a play, right? Who knows? But if you're going to build standard, it's fine. Haste I've seen been used in like some arena cleaves, and even in the past, I think when he was just buffed, he was also used as an opener for regular cleave, like in like RTA. The issue with haste is that, of course, his base speed is going to pose an issue comparing to all the more meta openers. So you probably wouldn't have haste built at like 310 speed or something. Like why wouldn't you use that gear on someone else? So the S1 buff becoming 50% decreased defense, like even if you don't read their intent behind it, it automatically tells that, okay, then it's for like farming content, maybe PvE farming type of content, where he could do defense break onto the S3, defense break onto the S1. But if you're playing him in a PvP, he's in a cleave team, because he doesn't have survival. He's in a cleave team. So why would you need 2-turn defense break on the S1? Like, you would never get to that turn. So that's obviously, it's like a PvE thing, and then a 4-turn cooldown, again, PvE thing for rotation or repetitive rotation. So it's okay, but whatever. So you can really tell, like, throughout the entire thing so far, like, it's kind of underwhelming, and you can definitely really see that, oh yeah, okay, like what my guildmate said, if it was E7WC reason, you can kind of see why this is a pretty not super like important patch, you know, like it's not gonna make a lot of heroes more usable. But anyways, exclusive equipment also changed. I'm not gonna talk about that too much. And oh, I guess this is important to know though. You do get 15% chance more defense break, so I mean that's not nothing, right? So that's good. Tanibria, kit wise, I think that it's cool. The imprint concentration to me is the highest value here, 27%. Also getting a Gabby, that's super cool. A lot of people are thinking this probably gonna be the new Fireball for the Earth Expo. I would agree, but the thing is, I don't know if I can re-gear her to use her for that. Whereas I'm using her right now in Nightmare Raid, but I'm pretty sure I could just swap it. I think it should be fine. Get bonus effectiveness, and you get now more damage, so I think it could be usable in both my content, Earth Expo and Nightmare Raid. But I do have like Fireball built and molded, so there's that. Either way, it's a good buff, and she has been on the PvE side of things for longer than not, so I think that overall this is good, especially if you're using her. You just got like a buffed, like a way better version of her, so it's great. Mort on the other hand though, I definitely think that his buff is probably, like, out of all the PvP-able heroes, so Uelle, Lionheart, Mort's is probably the best buff that I can think of. In terms of from like A to B, where he came from and where he's going to be. The 50% to activate Sacred Blessing versus 100%, that's a game changer. That's always been one of the things that people complain about for Mort, and I mean, Mort took what, 3 buffs to get to this point? For them to finally be like, okay, fine, fine, like maybe it's not too OP, it would increase his usage for sure. I definitely think so. You would never really use Mort for the Sacred Blessing, but that had always been one of the, like, the complaint portions for him. It's like, yes, he could do injury, and yes, he could defense break, but, you know, the Sacred Blessing added a lot for him, because he would be on a rotation when he's sitting still after his S3 for a long time. And then they buffed his S3 as well. The healing is decreased, which I think is good too, because if they're compensating for the 3-turn cooldown, that's 100% worth it. The healing decreased, because generally Mort, when he starts the turn, he might not even have taken any damage, but you would S3 in almost all scenarios for him, because that's where you start the rage buff and all that stuff, and so you could ignore pen defense break, and you know, so like you technically don't really need the healing at the amount that it was in the past. And for a full turn to rotate back into a higher healing, like he'd be dead by then. Like it's either your opponents are dead or he'd be dead by then. So overall, this is a better buff for his S3. The healing is decreased. It's still usable, but at least it's 3 turns. And then so you got the injury, you got the high damage, the AoE of course, and then you have the healing decrease, but by then your opponents should be far along, like in terms of dead. So I think that Mort, even though it doesn't seem like it's a huge buff, I think is the biggest buff for all the PvP-able heroes. So that's really good. So Silk, I'm trying to wrap my head around. There's defense pen, that's insanely good. She has pretty good high base speed, if I remember correctly. My issue with her is that I'm not quite sure where she fits. So they're saying that she's gonna have like, so you gain 1 focus and then consume an attack, dispelling buff from the caster. Sorry. So this is 2 separate claws, right? So the focus 1 turn and then consume 1 focus 1 attack, dispelling 1 debuff from the caster, increase combat readiness by 15%. So like, I guess it's good if you're taking her into a debuffing comp. But the fact that she has D-spell and can manipulate combat readiness and can defense pen tells me that they want to use her in PvP. But that's what I kind of don't remember, is like I don't think she has, I guess Guiding Light might be a decent artifact for her. I definitely think we'll have to see, because I remember back in the day, like season 1 of like Arena, like Silk was okay, but she was mainly used for PvE, for the CR manipulation and speed buff for entire team and all that. I don't know, I'm not 100% sure how she'll be used here outside of she has to have Guiding Light, right? Because the thing for me is like, you have to have survival for her to be good, but you're not gonna build a bruisery, I think. And so she becomes a nuking damage. I'm not 100% sure that her role is that important right now, but I could be wrong. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about this buff. This is the one I can't get my head around. It's like, on paper it seems to be pretty decent, but it's also focus based. So I'm not quite sure. Solitaria is being spammed a lot right now. Too many really good focus based heroes that Solitaria has to be considered as a counter. So like if Silk is going to be quote unquote meta, then she still has to deal with Solitaria. And you can't pre-ban Solitaria, there's just too many other threats. So I feel like they don't necessarily talk about it. I don't know if it's PvE hero. I think the buff is for PvP, but it's just that doesn't feel like it's strong enough. Yeah, so I don't know what to say. Like outside of this, I mean, reading this, dispelling 1 debuff from the caster, I'm assuming that you have to have the focus though to do that. Attacks the enemy with arrows, and even if you don't, my question is still like survival, right? Attacks the enemy with arrows, decrease combat rates by 10%, and then damage dealt increase proportional caster speed, and she gets speed buff, right? Team speed buff. And then penetrating defense by 20%, and then most likely you'll be running on pen set. But it's like, is that enough? Yeah, she's a single target hero, but I feel like I would use like Adventurer, what is it, Wander Silk? No, not Wander Silk, her name, Wanda, something Wanda. Elagos even has like, I think a better kit that I'm thinking of in terms of like, he could be fit into cleave better. This is like getting debuffs, like getting debuffed, assuming that she get debuffed. So I don't know, this feels like it's in like not a cleave team. I don't know where she fit. It's a really confusing one for me. Suthan, increased in defense, combat readiness by 50. So the 2 burn and the defense, like I mean, are they preparing for SC? I think if they are, maybe usable, but at the moment, like you could tell even in their design, effective in prolonged battles, but low viability due to his low base stats. So now that he has the more defense, it increases viability. But it feels like it's kind of lazy. Like, yes, it increases the viability, but it's like where was he used even before? Like, effective in prolonged battles, like, but which battles, right? So we can skip that. We're getting to the, I think, the meatier portion of this patch. Rise of Monarch, this is definitely a good one. Increased defense by 10% was before, now all allies by 10%. So Knight artifacts definitely, like Aureus has been big, right? It says Aureus gives the damage sharing and then also defense for everyone. So it's like when Rise of Monarch is, even though it's a 5-star and it's not, you know, absorbing damage, it just felt, it did feel kind of like lackluster. And even though there was a while, like about which season, that it was used on like really fast, like Aros or something. That was before Aros got his buff to bury the backliner. That was like one of his like usable artifacts, but it wasn't good, right? So like this increased 10% for everyone is considerable. I don't think it's gonna change, like gonna replace any other Knight artifacts at the moment. Like for Last Rider Crow, like you most likely still be on Aureus or something like that. Like you might see this brushed off and like dusted off and people using it. It's still not super insane. It's just because Knight artifacts right now, it's like it's either you're doing damage as a Knight or you're doing like protection, and there's nothing at the moment really much better than Aureus when it comes to damage share. So I don't think that this is going to replace anything anytime soon, even though it's a 5-star artifact. Dux Noctus, instant buff, super good. This is super usable 6 times. Obviously overall you're getting more attack, but you're also getting more attack like right off the bat. So this is at the moment Dux Noctus is like best in slot for Commander Pavel, and this is going to be great, right? Because like, you know, I'll be using it right away. I'm already using it on my Commander Pavel, and so this buff is going to make him much stronger in a cleaving scenario. So C Pavel is hardly usable in World Arena, and if he is, it is not something that like you need guiding light on. Like you're drafting correctly no matter what. So Dux Noctus could still be his best in slot even in World Arena. It's just that he's not that used. So overall, really good buff. It just reminded me of the last patch where we had the Iron Fan buff. And at this point, even up to this point, I still don't know what Iron Fan does. Like, who is it for? Some people at that time were saying that, hey, yeah, the increased combat readiness means that like maybe Commander Pavel could be built at base speed, right? But I don't know, I'm not convinced. Steadfast Gatekeeper. One of the oddest, I won't say buff, I would say changes for this one. Decreases damage suffered by elite boss for up to 20%. So at the moment, I'm running like Sword of Azera on my Knight in Expo. This is like a better Sword of Azera, which appreciated, but like I have literally been killed by certain Bellion comps in Arena that use Steadfast Gatekeeper for the combat readiness. Like it would be an Arena defense that had like Politis and then like a Bellion, and then like, so I want to cleave it, so I'm using ML Charles, and the Bellion is like 270 speed or something like that. So I push ML Charles and, you know, boom, Bellion gets the turn, provoke locks, and damages the rest of my follow-up. And I'm just like, oh frick, right? So I've actually lost 2 Bellion on Steadfast Gatekeeper. It's not a very strong artifact in World Arena, but in a defensive scenario, because I've lost that Bellion defense like on multiple weeks and refreshing, you don't know which is that team, right? Like the player used Steadfast Gatekeeper on his fast Bellion, but guised himself in an Arena defense that other people are using, right? It's just that not a lot of people run a 270, 280 Bellion or whatever. So that is funny. So when I saw this, I immediately thought about that defense. I'm like, ouch, that sucks, because now there is nothing that gives a benefit of Steadfast Gatekeeper, like in terms of CR boosting and Knight, that isn't Hillag Lance. But Hillag Lance was a single target only, and Steadfast Gatekeeper was AoE, so it's like, it's vastly different. But the thing is, actually, if they buff this, maybe there is a 5-star equivalent Knight artifact that has duality effects. So AoE attacks equals combat readiness, that could even be 10%, and plus like stats or something. Because if you've noticed, I mean, if you haven't noticed, Smilegate has been pumping out especially limited artifacts with like stat increase / some kind of crazy effect. So just off the top of my head, like stuff like the Lethe artifact that was just released, like you have something that used to be probably even usable as a standalone artifact. So Lethe's artifact gives base HP %, oh sorry, not base, total HP % on top to your hero that equips that artifact, including damage dealt if there was an extra attack involved, like an additional damage dealt. So realistically, it's a 3-fold artifact. So check 1 is increased HP and is already usable. Check 2 is increased damage, that's already usable. And check 3 is increased damage if you have an extra attack, increase additional damage. So there's 3 checks in that one artifact. It's potentially that they're nerfing this so that something better can come out. Because I just don't see that this buff was necessary in any degree. They could have made a different artifact, or they could have given us a free event artifact that had a sort of a Azera effect with an increased defense to all, but they chose to remove a 4-star artifact that was quote-unquote usable. Like, why didn't they just buff this straight up? That's the weird thing, right? So, you know, mark my words, we'll see if we're gonna get a 5-star equivalent Knight artifact that increased combat range when there's AoE, and probably an additional line that comes after this that gives like stats or something. That's my best guess. Alright, so that's pretty much it. And the last thing that I talk about is the restrict buff. Oh sorry, the restrict debuff buff. This is I think this is the biggest one. Alright, so like one of the biggest buffs, and something that will, you know, I think will cascade down in not just the heroes that are usable right now, but in heroes that are going to be released later. So at the moment, there's a very strong combo in World Arena. It's Peyra and ML Rowana. ML Rowana is almost unusable with any other stripper outside of Peyra. Peyra, high base speed, increased attack buff for Rowana, of course. In terms of like the S2 on Peyra, then S3 for attack buff, protection for the entire team, Rowana reset, and then you can almost, you don't even need to draft cleave follow up, right? Because realistically, opening with like a Peyra Rowana, if you could get them in, it can even make opponents like standard anti-cleave comp like worthless. So like that is like one of the things. But the Rowana though has pushback, CR pushback, and so realistically right away this restrict debuff buff is immediate buff to Rowana. Okay, it's not a huge one, but it is significant to note. The restrict debuff, I need to make sure I'm using my words correctly. The restrict debuff used to be the effect on the right. When Cerise, so restrict was introduced when Cerise was introduced, or if anything, she made restrict meta, okay, at the time that Cerise was released. And also Cerise buff when? She's a limited hero, I just thought about that. But the CR, like they changed it where that they made her less OP because they kind of figured that she was way too strong, because she originally has CR pushback as well with restrict. And then they realized like, okay, maybe let's make restrict. You can't decrease it, so they removed the CR pushback on her, which at that time it was the right choice. But I mean, now the floodgates have opened. All these heroes are too strong, so I think, I mean, Cerise is not better, but I think that they're just like, okay, we need to make this debuff like one-sided now, right? Kind of like, yeah. Anyways, I'm not gonna go on to that, but it is a like buff. Like, it is a buff for sure. I don't even think this is a buff that anybody wanted, to be honest. Like now it's more like, oh no, people will now see that like if you're already suffering from people like, you know, outspeeding you and then crowd controlling you, and then you're not able to get combat readiness or whatever, oh boy, like now this is just too crazy. Now you can't see our boost up, but they could definitely push you back, right? So in certain concepts, in terms of like team comps, probably you can end up not getting a turn at all, right? I'm not saying that there's a comp like that exists right now, but it's just more of something like that is something worth noting. And that kind of scares me a bit. Like I said, I don't believe anyone in the community with their mental state in check would be like, oh wow, restrict buff, awesome, right? Like, I think more people are more worried about this buff than like being like happy about it. But it is something that just saying that again immediately gives ML Rowana a slight increase in usage because of who she's paired with. But in the future though, like, what does this mean? I'm kind of scared about that personally. Anyways, but that's my thoughts on the entire buff patch. Actually, this video still ended up being way longer than I thought, because I thought this is very underwhelming. So but I did spend key points on talking about, I think the Mort one, and Steadfast Gatekeeper, and then the restrict debuff. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, what you can think about this buff. And I think that, you know, I'm not expecting too much commentary on this, because I think everybody can kind of tell this was a relatively low priority buff patch for them to figure out. Anyways, I'm going to end this for the video recording. If you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server, follow me on Twitter, and subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.